Question. Is it appropriate what the Trump administration is doing lawfare against Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, who had prosecuted him for fraud and had extracted a $150 million judgment against him, and others? But let's just use Letitia James as an example here, because he's actually doing lawfare against others as well. Of course, the lawfare concept started with the Democrats. It started with her and Jack Smith and all those other prosecutions against him, both on the federal and on the state level. Um, so, um, so the question here is, I guess, the question is it appropriate to retaliate using the same technique that the Democrats had essentially invented? I'm not sure if it had been practiced before. I'm not aware, certainly not at this high level against the president. So this is a technique that the Democrats had first employed, and now Trump is doing it against them. So is it appropriate? Now, this is a very interesting concept. Whenever I think of this question, I think of the prisoner's dilemma, the iterated prisoner's dilemma. So I don't want to go too deep into this because it's a whole entire separate topic, the prisoner's dilemma. But basically, what it boils down to is like this. Whenever somebody does something against you, and if you retaliate, okay, also known in the prisoner's dilemma, it's called defecting, right? If you retaliate, you're essentially bringing down the whole system with you, right? So you're punishing yourself, but you're also punishing the entire system. Okay, so in this case, you're establishing a precedent that lawfare is fine. They can do it to me, and well, they can't, but they did it to me, right? I'm going to do it to them, and then it's going to be an endless cycle. So you have the option of either bringing the entire system down, or I can cooperate. That's the term used in the prisoner's dilemma, and essentially all of us are going to come out ahead, right? Now, if the enemy / opponent, if they defect and I cooperate, I'm in huge trouble, right? But if I'm always defecting, then all of us are always going to come out behind. Right? We're going to always suffer in the long run tremendously if we're always defecting. So what I'm basically essentially trying to say here is that there is a strong argument to be made that even though they started the lawfare, Trump should say, no, I'm not going to retaliate in this manner because it's just improper, it's wrong, and I'm going to take the high road here. Or as Jesus would say, turn the other cheek. Okay, so turn the other cheek is a very strong Christian ideal, and it's really a guttural thing that every conscientious person understands, that it's not always the right thing to punch back. Okay, sometimes you just gotta let it go, right? At the same time, I think it's also wrong for those Christians or for those people who think that the appropriate thing is to never retaliate. That's also wrong. So it wasn't meant to be, turn the other cheek wasn't meant to be a dictum to say that you should never ever do that. It just means that you should consider it. It's a thing you should. It's a tactic that you should sometimes deploy depending on the circumstances. Okay, you don't always have to punch back. That's the idea here. Okay, now back to the question of whether it was appropriate for the Trump administration to prosecute Letitia James. Now, so like I said, so personally, I don't have all the information, but it appears to me that Trump could have taken the high road and not have done this, and it would have been fine. And there's a very good chance that the whole lawfare would have been laid to rest and nobody would have ever used it again. Okay, because essentially the Democrats, you have to think of it this way. The lawfare didn't really work, right? What it was meant to do is portray Trump as a felon and then dissuade people from voting for him as a result, right? Didn't work, okay? It failed. And the verdicts against him will probably be overturned. The sentences, at least, will be overturned. So Trump appealed the sentence, and I believe it was, and I believe it was a successful appeal. So he's not going to pay $150 million, right? And so what I'm trying to say here is that the Democratic salvo against him is most likely unsuccessful. So you don't have to retaliate. You can just basically simply bask in the success of your presidency, and they have by default failed. The fact that they didn't prevent you from getting elected, and so move on, right? So he doesn't have to do this. At the same time, am I blaming him and am I livid that he's doing it? No, I'm not. Why not? First of all, because I recognize that the dictum of turn another cheek is not always applicable, and it may very well not be applicable in this case. Secondly, if you hear Trump talking about this, he always says that let them prosecute and let's see what happens, right? So, in other words, the selective prosecution that he's doing is only on the prosecutory level, not on the verdict level. He's not necessarily saying that he wants jurors to convict her for these things, which is interesting. Of course, you don't bring charges, right? It's a waste of government resources if you're gonna bring charges and you don't intend for a conviction to follow, right? But this is, of course, not an ordinary type of prosecution. We know that it's lawfare. It's pretty obvious that Letitia James, the circumstances of the case is that she had some type of second home that she put up as collateral, and she mischaracterized something in that loan application. Okay, completely petty and ridiculous. Okay, you don't prosecute based on this. Nobody cares. Nobody has gotten defrauded. There's no victim. There's no nothing. Exact same thing that she did against Trump, right? With her fraud case against him because he inflated his assets, whatever, which the banks knew, of course, right? You don't give out that $300 million loan without thoroughly investigating the value of the assets of the applicant, right? So there was no victim there. So it's exactly the type of prosecution that she did against him. And so what I'm saying is, so Trump is saying, okay, let's prosecute and let the chips fall where they may, meaning, okay, I'm not pressuring the jury to convict. I just want it to be prosecuted. I want to air out this grievance, right? So let's let it see the light of the day in the court, and then let's see what happens. That's what Trump is saying. So I think framed as such, it doesn't really bother me that much because at the end of the day, technically, you're only punished if you're convicted. If you're not convicted, then yes, it could be a hassle. And in practice, it is a hassle to have to defend yourself. But again, technically, it's not a punishment. Okay, having to show up in court is not a punishment. You just show up in court, right? There's no penalty. The actual showing up in court inherently is not a penalty. So at the end of the day, it doesn't bother me that much. As a juror, I would say do not convict. Okay, even though I'm pro-Trump and I voted for him several times, and I don't even think that Trump necessarily wants a juror to convict. Okay, the way he is seeing it is that the punishment / retaliation is in the prosecution itself, not in the conviction. Okay, and by the way, Trump himself, he so far hasn't paid the price for any of those convictions. Okay, I don't think he's paid anything. I'm not sure about this. Don't quote me on this. But even if he did, this is still being litigated in the appeals court, and so he might still get the money back. So I don't know for sure what's going on there. But the point being here is that even if he's fully retaliating, it's not necessarily in an actual sentence being carried out. It's in the fact that a sentence is being given, right? That a verdict is being pronounced rather than in the penalty itself. Okay, so what I'm basically saying here is that what I would probably, knowing what I do, which is not necessarily that much, Trump might have privy information that I don't, but it doesn't appear appropriate for Trump to be doing this. Okay, I would have liked to see him take the high road. At the same time, I'm not terribly disturbed by what he's doing because I do believe that retaliation is appropriate in some instances, and this may very well be the instance where it's appropriate, especially when it's only done on the prosecutory level and not on the sentencing and carrying out that sentence level. So, like I said, I don't want to see her actually pay anything, and I don't think that she will. Oh, and one more thing to note is that it's obviously symbolic, this retaliation, because she's being prosecuted for $18,000. That's how much the interest would have been if she had gotten the higher interest rate because of the second home that she put up as collateral or whatever is not a home that she's living in. So 18,000, it's a joke. The prosecution itself cost more than $18,000. Like, again, under ordinary circumstances, this should never have been prosecuted, right? And we know that, and the Trump administration knows. There's no secret about that. It's basically Trump is saying openly, hey, this is retaliatory for what you did to me, right? But like I said, at the same time, the retaliation isn't in the verdict, it's not in the actual sentence, it's in the prosecution thereof. So this is why I'm not terribly perturbed by this, and it appears that I would not have done this, but Trump is exercising his own judgment and his own discretion on this, and I accept it. I don't necessarily respect it, but it's acceptable to me. Thank you for watching.